Hello and welcome to today's Defense News webcast for AUSA Global Force Next, titled Future Tools, Future Battlefields. Thanks for joining us today. During this episode, we will talk with the Deputy Commanding General of Army Futures Command and the Director of the Army's Futures and Concepts Center, Lieutenant General Scott McKean, and the Deputy Commanding General for Acquisition and Systems Management at Army Futures Command, Lieutenant General Thomas Todd. As we all know, threats are changing fast and adversaries are investing in advanced technologies to gain an edge. So today we will discuss how service leaders and industry officials can help provide that advantage, as well as the keys to ground force modernization in the coming years. I'm excited to get started on this interesting topic. This webcast would not be possible without today's sponsor, Leonardo DRS. So we thank you. To start our discussion, we have Dr. Daniel Goree, Senior Vice President at the Lexington Institute. Dr. Goree, welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I think our audience today is very familiar with unmanned systems, and my own sense is that maybe 3 to 5 years ago, some people were talking about counter-UAS systems, but now the volume on that conversation seems to have really crescendoed. So I wanted to hear from you on this. How would you describe and assess the threat of UAS today, specifically for Army ground troops and military combat vehicles, and what's changed so much in these last couple of years?
Great question. The threat is growing. We all hear about large unmanned aircraft systems, Predators and the like, but the real growth now is in small systems. They call them class 1 and 2, 50 pounds. They fly relatively slow, relatively low, don't carry much in the way of payload, but with the advance in sensor technology, in guidance technology, and that they're commercial, these systems are now proliferating around the world. They're in the hands of terrorists. They're in the hands of, they were in the hands of ISIS. They're in the hands of our adversaries or potential adversary militaries, and they can transform warfare. They pose a targeting threat to Army systems and vehicles, but they also can be used actually to attack vehicles, even attack personnel with small payloads.
And you talked about the commercial element of this, and sometimes they're very inexpensive. And I know other folks have likened this to kind of a new form of the IED. And so what do these counter UAS systems look like today, and what kind of technology development is needed to stay ahead of the curve here?
Well, in terms of the threat, you can now buy systems on the open market, quad rotors and the like. And even if they aren't armed, they have this kind of sensors on them that can be used to go spot hostile forces, to go target places. They can be used against airfields and other facilities, just run them into the engine of an aircraft. What's also happening is we're starting to develop the capability, commercial as well as military, to do multiple UASs at the same time. So instead of just having one or two, that's what's different from an IED. Instead of just one or two in the road, we're now potentially in the world of swarms of these things, multiples, 50, even 100 of them coming at our forces at the same time, which complicates defense against them hugely.
Yeah, and so explain that. Why would that be why would someone want to use a swarm? And then what makes that so difficult for the systems we have today?
Great. One of the main reason is because in a swarm, if I'm looking to attack a vehicle, I can send 5 UASs out. Maybe the defense can shoot down 1 or 2 unless it has a very wide area capability, but those others can get through. Or you can simply use swarms of very cheap UASs to run the other side out of ammunition. So if I'm trying to shoot at them, if I'm trying to use missiles against them, if I'm trying to use a killer drone against the drone, I'm in this kind of fight between offense and defense, where frankly, up until recently, the offense has the advantage. That is, the UAS operator has the advantage.
And so if the Army had to deploy a counter UAS capability, tomorrow, what would that look like, and how would it help the troops on the ground and the vehicles there?
Well, the Army, interesting enough, has a really good capability at the moment. It doesn't have enough of them. And it's a dedicated system. It's called MLIDS, which is Mobile Low Slow UAS integrated defeat system. That's the key, integrated defeat system. It's on 2 vehicles, multiple sensors, so it can spot all these objects, big, small, low flying, hovering, and it has multiple ways of defeating it. It can use a cannon if it can spot it. It can use a Coyote counter drone against the drone, and it also has non-kinetic electronic warfare capabilities. So you essentially, the operator can pick. If it's a swarm, I may go non-kinetic. If I've got one object out there, I can shoot it with a bullet. That also establishes a cost exchange ratio that the defense can live with. And it's a mobile system. There's a fixed version of the same thing that the Army is buying. So multiple sensors, multiple effect systems, and a smart command and control network is what you need to defeat this new threat.
One of the things I know you and I mentioned before this conversation is, in the missile defense community, we hear a lot about the cost curve, that you don't want to spend too much money to, trying to bring down a drone that maybe only costs $500 or $600. So how is that conversation, happening right now with counter UAS, and how do those same principles maybe apply, or maybe they don't?
Well, no, they do in general, but let's remember, you're talking about defending our soldiers, airmen, sailors. That's a lot of value in that, even if the attack is with a cheap object. You're talking about defending vehicles that are worth millions of dollars a piece. But in terms of the cost exchange ratio, you really want to have the variety of capabilities, but ways of doing it cheaply. If you can shoot it with a bullet or a cannon round, that's relatively cheap. If I can do it electronically, that's almost not a cost at all. But you want to have the capability to use not only the best system, the best means to counter it, but also have a variety. So you may use the electronic system against a swarm, and if a couple leak through and are getting real close, you may convert over to using something kinetic just to make sure nothing gets through. And overall, that's a good cost exchange.
Yeah, and it's that layered defense then that makes a difference.
Exactly right.
When we're looking forward, where do you expect to see technology development, and where do you expect to see industry kind of making some internal research and development costs to try and bring this level of flexibility as the threat evolves?
Well, remember, we got thousands of vehicles, hundreds of thousands of people. What you really need is an approach that exploits all the sensors, all the various weapon systems we now have on vehicles. We have an active protection system we're now putting on our tanks and maybe other vehicles. That's got a radar, that's got effectors. You want to sort of have an integrated capability based on mission equipment packages where I can pull from different sensors. I can use different kind of effectors. I can go seamlessly from electronic means or cyber means to kinetic means to a counter UAS. And you want to do this so I don't have to have a dedicated defense against these small UASs. I want to be able to use whatever capabilities the vehicle has, maybe with a few add-ons for the specific mission, and thereby essentially lower the cost overall, improve the capability, be able to send information back and forth from different vehicles with different capabilities. It's sort of a comprehensive integrated defense based on an array of sensors and weapons.
That makes sense. So to get there, what does the Pentagon need to do next? What kind of steps are you hoping to see maybe in this year's budget or the next couple years budget to get to that reality you just described?
Great question. The issue right now is we're sort of trying to just get things into the field. So the Joint Counter UAS Office, which is sort of the Army as the executive agent, has picked a number of systems: fixed, mobile or mounted systems, and handhelds. And most of them are sort of a single sensor, a single effector. What we really need to do is to put the research money into an integrated capability where you have mission equipment packages that can do, in effect, multiple things with maybe slight variations. Because there's no way we're going to be able to equip every vehicle and every soldier, sailor, Marine, whatever, with a dedicated counter UAS capability any more than we can do with a dedicated counter ATGM capability. So we've got to figure out a way to do this, and that's really an integration issue. It's not a capability. Capabilities are out there, sensor and effectors, but there needs to be that integration, and that needs to sort of start at the top. The Joint Counter Office needs to push this. The service, the Army in particular, needs to push this as an approach rapidly.
Great. Well, Dr. Gore, thank you very much. That's all the time we have. As a reminder, a recording of this webcast will be available on defensenews.com and at the AUSA Global Force Next Media Center. We will return in just a moment, and we will be joined by our main speakers for the day, Lieutenant General Scott McKean and Lieutenant General Thomas Todd. While you wait, you can register for our upcoming C4ISRNet conference on your screens below. Please stay tuned.
Hello, and welcome back to Future Tools, Future Battlefields webcast. My name is Jen Judson, reporter for Defense News. Just a quick housekeeping item. You may send questions throughout the session by clicking the Ask a Question button below your video. I'll try to get to as many as possible. Joining us today are the Deputy Commanding General of Army Futures Command, Lieutenant General Scott McKean, and the AFC Deputy Commanding General for Acquisition and Systems Management, Lieutenant General Thomas Todd. Thank you both for being here with me virtually to dive into the challenging work the Army is doing to ensure its future force has overmatch on future battlefields and to deter amid great competition. The Army must transform now. It's what leadership's been saying for years, and Army Futures Command was created to ensure this happens following decades of big program failures. As you both fill important roles directly under AFC Commander, I hope this conversation explores how the Army is approaching the Herculean task of tackling an ambitious list of priorities that will bring the service overmatch and align with doctrine still being formed, all while avoiding the mistakes of the past. So we're going to forego introductory remarks and dive straight into questions because 45 minutes will fly by. So my first question, I'm just going to direct to Lieutenant General McKean. Army Futures Command stood up over 2 years ago, just about 2 years ago. What have you learned when it comes to synchronizing all of the command's modernization priorities across the Army and also on a joint level? And what hasn't worked and what is working? Are there any changes you envision for the command to function optimally?
Hey, thanks, Jen. It's great to be here with you. And, it's a great story about what's gone on over the past 3 years here in Army Futures Command. As Joe Murray likes to say sometimes, he kind of coined it as a startup, as he's trying to work it while managing the entire Army modernization portfolio. So pretty significant undertaking. I think one of the key things that I've determined, I got here in November of this past year, and having General Todd and General Richardson here in one place, I think has been a key part of what is driving Army Futures Command right now in this key period. Putting science and technology with General Todd, General Richardson's CFT, the CFT effort that he's leading, and our work with concepts has really put the leadership together so better integrate the ideas and the things that are going on. So from a leadership perspective, I think that was a key decision that was made, and I think it's bearing fruit right now. As you look back, how did Army Futures Command really, what have they done and where are we going? So in 2018, we published the multi-domain operations concept. A concept is an idea, and some people believe it's a fully developed doctrine and those type things. No, it was a big idea, and it was based off a lot of wargaming and experimentation about how we would deal with threats in the future. And that concept, it took some criticism early because it was hard to understand in certain cases. But that's what ideas are supposed to do. They're supposed to generate thought. They're supposed to generate debate and then wargaming and experimentation to bear it out. And over the past 3 years, that's exactly what we've done. And through that, we've got to the point where one of the tenets, convergence, bringing these different technologies and systems to bear at the right place at the right time, it's come together in what's called Project Convergence. And we'll talk more. I know there'll be questions on that here in a little bit, but that was one key aspect of what that concept drove. And what it also brought together was the joint services and our multinational partners, because they all realized that the problem is a shared problem. of operating in these multi-domains. So Army Futures Command, bringing scientists and soldiers together, doing it in the dirt, are things that have really been accomplished by Army Futures Command over the past 2 years.
Okay, thank you. And for Lieutenant General Todd, you have a relatively new role at AFC, which is focused on acquisition and systems management. So can you talk about the thinking behind the creation of this role and how it's improving the interface between academia, industry, and Army acquisition branch and AFC as a whole to ensure modernization efforts make it into fielding?
Yeah, I'll be glad to. Good to see you again, Jen. It's really the next step in the evolution. My predecessor, Major General Pat Burton, was here, is really part of ASALT resident here in AFC. Well, this new role that I'm in is actually a position within AFC. So I work directly for the commanding general of AFC, General Murray, and ultimately am the senior acquisition professional inside the formation. One that can advise on programs that are getting ready to transition, science and technology efforts and readiness of those efforts, and then also about working with ASALT, a great partner certainly as we look at investment portfolios and decisions that have to be made as we learn along the way. One of the things that General McKean talked to you about was next steps and concepts and how Project Convergence came along. Well, we are learning every day as we integrate this Army modernization enterprise. And one of the benefits of having a senior acquisition professional here working directly for AFC is it really gets rid of a lot of the seams and gaps that we traditionally have amongst what are otherwise stovepiped organizations. So it's ultimately going to allow us to see ourselves better, to make decisions in a more timely fashion, and hopefully make even better decisions as we look at modernization programs.
Thank you. I want to jump into Project Convergence, and since you brought it up, there's been a lot of attention on it since its first run at Yuma last year. What surprised you, and both of you can answer this, about the first campaign of learning, and how will Project Convergence 21 and 22 evolve? We know the other services and allies and partners will play a greater role. What do you anticipate will be the challenges there? And how will you expand just in terms of the types of things you will be evaluating?
Hey, Jen, thanks. And this is probably one of the most important things the Army is doing right now, and it's because it's become the cornerstone of our experimentation. So it's not just a once-a-year event. It's part of a campaign of learning, and we've now expanded. What we learned from the first Project Convergence is not just about the technologies and how they work together, but how to put together these exercises and these experiments, throughout the year to ensure that we're learning. And so when we get to that capstone event with Project Convergence, it is, putting all the things that we learned throughout the year together with our joint service partners, and making sure that interoperability is not just something to put technology together, but it's also solving the problems that we're trying to determine ways to get after with our adversaries. Thomas?
Yeah, that's really it in a nutshell. I'll add from a technology standpoint, we didn't see ourselves holistically, and we're a very large organization, many different moving parts. All simultaneously. So one of the beauties of Project Convergence, and Scott alluded to this, is we learn from 20 to 21 to 22, not only in what we're learning about the problems that we have, but also we're able to see ourselves better. We're able to visualize massive amounts of data through experimentation. And what this does is it's really adopting a best practice from the commercial sector that obviously has to turn experiments rather quickly to see themselves and to test data. And so as we put many moving pieces together. I look forward to really what the analysis shows. And the beauty of an experiment or many experiments leading up to a capstone experiment like Project Convergence is the experiment itself becomes the means at which you see data. So we're not attempting just to compile it and visualize it, right? Massive amounts of data. We're actually putting it into use and then seeing really what works and what doesn't work. And then we're able to make better decisions with a lot more confidence going forward.
Thank you. I want to pull the string on that that's a little bit. And Lieutenant General McKean, you said when you took over your position that you wanted to improve experimentation velocity when you took over at Futures and Concepts. What are you doing to amp that up? I mean, you talked about how this is a whole campaign of learning leading up to Project Convergence. And I think one of the things that we've recently learned is that there'll be an experimentation, I think mostly focused on the aviation side, the air side, Edge 21 coming up. Are there some other sort of feeder exercises or feeder experiments that we'll be hearing about that focus on different aspects and you start to kind of converge them together in Project Convergence? Can you explain a little bit more what you're doing across this whole campaign of learning?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Look, the increase in the velocity of experimentation, I think, will be critical to our success in actually getting these technologies integrated into our force. Part of that, so two different approaches. One, an academic approach, and that what we call our Future Studies program. It's, we're doing one a quarter. We brought in academia for the first one, try to understand what is the character of warfare in 2035 and beyond. So we kind of try to, just get the most current thought in there. And then we brought together different members from around the Army to include the War College, West Point, Joint Service teams came in, SAMs, and we started looking at, okay, given that environment, how could we fight differently in that time and with the technologies that may or may not be there. And so with those teams, were incorporated members of our Army research labs, labs from around the country. Were actually teamed with these thinkers about what would be needed. So this is concepts driving science and technology driving concepts. And this cycle is something that I think will be a key to our success moving forward. And then on the technical side, Jim Richardson, Lieutenant General Jim Richardson has really led this effort, first off, by making a 3-star level board of directors with the other services and incorporating this at the end of Project Convergence 20. They've worked together throughout to build up to Project Convergence 21. So this increasing velocity now of bringing the different elements, first the services and the labs together. There are things that are happening in our labs today that are just amazing, but before they were very stovepiped. And so what we're doing now is we've connected all the labs. And so as we're doing tests and other things, and Thomas can illustrate this more, but as we've been doing that over the past 6 to 8 months, our velocity of learning has increased. And I think we'll see that bear out in Project Convergence 21. Thomas.
Yeah, I'll just add to echo, you think connecting labs is just a matter of a phone call away. It's really not. The interconnectivity of the work that's going on, what Scott mentioned, the science and technology experts sitting with the concept developers through a concept that DevCom has called Team Ignite, where they physically put scientists in the concepts formations to talk about really what technology can do, all the way to connecting the foundational layer of Project Convergence, which is really our networking, our communications layer, and a joint software integration lab, all within a matter of ultimately a year to 18 months. It's been phenomenal. And to Scott's point, Lieutenant General Jim Richardson led that effort with Ross Kaufman and really it's come to fruition already. We're in the midst of communication exercises with that JSIL at Aberdeen Proving Ground, which connects not only Army labs but the joint services in a way that we can conduct those mini experiments along the way to the capstone experiment. So we're always in an experimentation cycle, and that constant connectivity has, I think, given us the ability to do things that, quite frankly, we may have taken an annual iteration. Now we're breaking it down into a quarterly and a monthly iteration, and I have no doubt a daily soon to be.
And to follow up on that too, I've noticed that it seems like there's a very frequent industry days for project conversions, preparing for project conversions. Can you talk a little bit more about how you're collaborating with industry, and obviously not just the big prime contractors, but there's a lot of room to play even as a small business. So if you could talk about how those types of businesses are assisting in solving challenges and what you're seeing from these industry days in terms of collaborating with industry. I know it's not just industry days that you're collaborating with industry, but just talk a little bit more about how that's all been working out.
Yeah, I'll start off there. We just completed our second roundtable for Project Convergence Industry Day. The whole point is communicate often, and if anything, over communicate. We have been obviously a service that in particular doesn't want to communicate something that we might not have our hands around yet. Well, the neat thing about experimentation is it causes constant, and so as a result, after AUSA last year, our boss and the secretary at the time said, let's talk to them even more. We just talked to industry at AUSA, now let's talk to them again. And we did that. We were able to talk about joint mission threads and some things that the team obviously is looking out as really problems. And it really helped. DevCom in particular was already working just about 40 technologies with CRADAs. And they have, since that first industry day, about 18 other requests for just feedback, if you will. And they're evaluating those technologies as we speak. I have no doubt with over 1,000 participants signing up for Roundtable 2 that we'll have more. Now, when it comes to non-traditional businesses, so many of the traditional primes understand how to work with us, and they have a large capability resident in their company. For non-traditionals, though, we've taken a little bit different approach. First of all, we advertised, if you saw on that roundtable, our front door here at ArmyFuturesCommand.com. It really is a portal, as well as Army Applications Lab, AAL.Army. And, so there's two means. They can come in and talk to the small business office, but they can also go to Army Applications Lab, who has their own unique set of problem statements from the CFTs that say, look, we've also seen, in our major efforts, these seams and gaps. And could you please work with us on some seams and gaps? And so they're doing that through using small business innovative research funds. In particular, they have recently worked with Fire Faster cohort, which works the self-propelled howitzer effort. And it's a really holistic, it's a fantastic approach, because it takes what our technologies and puts them into a concept of how you increase rate of fire. And while we may have in the past looked at that as a material solution to do that, this takes into account logistics, movement, transportation of goods. It takes into account the external inventorying of goods, right, to keep pace with the Fire Faster event. So we would not have been there if we hadn't taken what was a non-traditional approach. But obviously through continued advertisements on SAM.gov, through our official announcements, as well as AAL's launch portal that they have for non-traditionals and the outreach that they do, I have no doubt that we're attempting to close some of those seams and gaps.
I want to shift gears just a little bit here and talk about multi-domain operations as part of the modernization process for the Army. And that, as you said in your introductory remarks, that is an idea. It's a concept right now. So what is being done to move that into doctrine? When will you be able to say you're using your doctrine rather than an idea? What goes into this, and how do you do this? And is it more challenging now that you're also focused on a joint operations concept?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, Jen. And so, first off, as I mentioned, having the leadership here in Austin really helps out as we look at modernization as a whole. When we get to the concepts work, the relationship that has to be solid is between ASC and TRADOC, and specifically, CAC with Lieutenant General Jim Rainey. And he and I, we served as commandants together, so relationship already kind of formed. And so bringing our teams together to go from concept to doctrine, we haven't done it in the Army in the past between two different organizations. It's always been inherent inside one organization. So we just added to the complexity of it. But to me, it's really, it's been fascinating. It's been very productive because our teams have really looked at it from different angles, and things that are ready for CAC to take on and begin the further development out. They have those things that weren't ready. We continue to work on our side. And so we've collaborated so that our forums are combined. So I sit as a co-chair with Jim during his meetings with his centers of excellence commanding generals. He sits in my meetings, and we really keep abreast of what's going on. Jim Rainey is now, CAC is now in direct support to Army Futures Command. So what that allows us to do is now have a common touch point, not just with each other, but also with General Murray. And that has really helped keep us flat in our development. So where are we? So right now, FM 3-0, which is kind of the cornerstone document, the capstone document of Army operations, currently titled Unified Land Operations. That's what it's been for a number of years. Next summer is our projected date, or TRADOC's projected date to publish FM 3.0 multi-domain operations. So that's taking concept to doctrine. Now, will everything that was in the MDO concept be in there? No, not everything's ready yet. That's what the continuous wargaming, the continuous experimentation has to derive those things that are ready and those things that aren't. What you'll see in the immediate term is investment into force structure changes, whether we need to change an organization to better be able to employ the technologies that we're developing. As we look at the doctrine and how we might fight differently, we can look at the command and control aspects and echelons of command, where things are led from. And so lots of work in this field. It's constant, but everything is feeding it, and we are, the relationships are allowing it to really move out at a very good pace.
Right. Just to follow up on that, how important is it to crafting the doctrine, the multi-domain task force experience that they're gaining when they're deployed in regions? We know that they've had a lot of activity in the Indo-Pacific Command region, but we have yet to see an MDTF stand up in Europe or anywhere else. So just curious, how important that is in terms of actually having an MDTF really get out there and experiment and evaluate the concept in Europe, especially since we're looking at great power competition, China and Russia. We've definitely evaluated the China side, but what about the Russia threat? So if you could talk a little bit more about how important that is, and when we might be able to actually see MDTFs materialize elsewhere, and how that will feed into the concept.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jen. The multi-domain task force it represents one of the key tenets of multi-domain operations. That's the ability, having formations capable of operating within multiple domains, as we talked about. And so, we're continuing to experiment with the multi-domain task force. It's been out in the Pacific because we know that's a priority theater. It's somewhere where we're really looking hard at right now, and the different types of threats that our adversaries can pose in that environment. But that's not the only environment we're looking at, as you know. And there was lots of work done at the end of the last decade, as with the Russian New Generation Warfare Study and all those type of activities that occurred there. So, we're kind of circling back around again and looking at how multi-domain forces would look best in Europe in the sense of organization, what types of materials they would need. It's probably not going to look exactly the same as the one in the Pacific. It may or may not. But, one of the things General Murray stresses is, don't go too fast. Don't go too far too fast, right? And we're really looking at this organization that we're working on, the first MDTF. And Brigadier General Jim Eisenhower out there has just done some amazing things in trying different organization structures, command and control structures. But it really amplifies the problems that we're dealing with, which is a constantly evolving adversary in the sense of the technologies that are out there. And so, having a multi-domain formation is very capable, but it also comes with the challenges of how do you integrate it and how does it operate within a joint force. This is something that we're working with the other services right now. And, as we work on the joint warfighting concept as a DoD, each of the services have kind of worked on their concepts or service concepts. And, so now we have formed together, all the services, the concept teams are bringing their service concepts together, and we're going to have, planning teams work to figure out the best way of integrating those service concepts to help inform the joint warfighting concepts. I think that both General Milley and General McConville's work back in the 2017-18 period really drove the beginnings of multi-domain operations as a concept. And I think the other services, they were either working on them or really accelerated their work at that point because of the opportunities that we're seeing. So things like the MDTF are essential aspects of that. I think we are working different thoughts about how it would be employed in Europe as well as other places around the world that may need a multi-domain task force.
All right. I wanted to ask about the Army modernization strategy. It was expected to be updated by mid-February, I think at the latest, to include non-cross-functional team efforts that are essential to multi-domain operations. Has this update happened, and can you elaborate on these non-CFT efforts and why they're essential to not only the Army, but across the joint force? And how do you make a case for these as the budget is looking to possibly even shrink in the coming years?
Well, I think this is an important point, Jen. One, the Army modernization strategy that was published in 2019, again, it was a foundational document for the Army's transformation, and we are transforming. As I mentioned, I see us as in year 3 or 4 of a really a pretty important transformation that we haven't seen since the mid-70s to early 80s with the scope and scale that we're transforming. But specifically, the key message is we haven't strayed from our priorities. Those 6 modernization priorities that were laid out in the 2019, what we've tried to message to industry, and I know Thomas can talk more about this as well, but we have not strayed from our investment strategies here, and we've been consistent in our message to industry about what our priorities are. And I think that is one a key aspect of having a successful modernization strategy. It doesn't mean we're fixated on one piece of technology. It's the priorities that remain the same, and we're working within those priorities. So to me, the Army modernization strategy has played a key role in there. our updating of it is to, we have to reassess. I mean, the speed of technology, the speed of effort. Heck, we're producing some of the things we said we were going to produce, and those things will be fielded here in the coming years. And so we have to continue to look: are we going through the right path? Are we looking into the right technologies? And so really, the Army modernization strategy is being updated. We'll have a Army modernization update here in the coming weeks, where we bring all the senior leaders together to make sure that the proposed inputs into that we understand why they were put in there, and that we can move forward from that point united as an Army and understanding what we're saying. Thomas?
Yeah, I would just add, rather than thinking when it was published, we are always updating it internally. And we're having those discussions with key leaders, like Scott mentioned. One of the things it gave us a heading for the Army's focused efforts, vice what were in the past disparate efforts, working kind of from a grounds up perspective. So now we work very top down. We ultimately have complementary guidance that works with many of the great ideas that come from the folks in the field as well as in our labs. It focuses on, as you know, the top 31 programs, but it also gave us 8 key research areas for S&T as well, right, to seed some support to future ideas that are emerging in real time. So I think as we focus on robotics, autonomy, AI, all the things that that we must make sure that are part of the future Army, we have a relatively good idea that those are worth taking a big bet on. It also gave us some steerage in our peripheral vision as we try to search and discover new technologies. So that modernization guidance is obviously key. Make no mistake about it, it is being talked about continuously. And so when we do make those shifts in what is published, there's been a lot of thought gone into that.
And just in terms of modernization efforts that maybe aren't just part of a CFT or part of one of the top priorities, but sort of integral across all of them, AI, electrification, unmanned. So can you talk a little bit more about where you see all this moving in terms of an Army of 2035? Will we be using vehicles that are all operating on batteries versus fuel? What are they going to be, optionally manned, unmanned? What are you envisioning?
Well, no, thanks, Jen. And that's really one of the key questions that we're asking. We're asking ourselves, we're asking industry, we're asking academia and all, is, how could we use emerging technologies to fight differently, in the future? And we hate putting timeframes on there, but sometimes you have to have a starting point just to give folks a guiding post of, the conversation that we're having. But, we've seen plenty of technologies that we would maybe label futuristic that are being employed in battlefields around the world right now. And so, understanding these technologies and how quickly that they become available is something that is a challenge, because, AI is here now, as we all know. It's just how do we best use it to enable the systems that we're incorporating, and how do you do it at scale? And that's one of the challenges that, the Army always faces, is we do things at scale. And so we have to be able to develop these out, and always keeping in mind that our partners, and we know that allies and partners will be a significant contributing element towards anything that we may endeavor in the future. They're going to have to decide, whether they're going to come along with us in some of these ventures, or if they're just going to try to figure out how do we maintain the ability to work together, even without those technologies. So this is the challenge that we have to take on, and we're trying to be very deliberate in that thinking, but we also have to think fast, right? Because this is this is happening, this is moving. I mean, autonomous systems absolutely are going to be a significant factor in the future. Alternative fuels, alternative power is also going to be a top priority that we look at as we move forward, and we have to. We know climate is a significant issue. We're going to have to figure out how we do things better, how we reduce our demand, and be able to operate. One of the characteristics of the future is that we may have to be more distributed in how we operate. We may have to disaggregate and then reaggregate when we need to, and to be able to do those type of things and to operate at the range and speed that we want to operate in, we have to be able to sustain those efforts. And so sustainment, protection are two of the key areas that we have to focus on moving into the future.
Yeah, I'll just add, we can no longer afford to sub-optimize. And a divided approach that we had when it came to modernization in the past did that. What Scott is talking about is in real time, as we see the future come about, create it as well. So we'll have opportunities, we can be opportunistic, but as we put technologies together, there are enablers. There are enabler programs that must come about in order to make those lead programs a success. One thing I will say is that through this, what I would consider the most agile environment I've seen in modernization in my entire career, we can't afford to reset the Army every 40 years, right? That can't be our battle rhythm. Every 40 years we do something new. The new environment requires us to reset it often. I won't define often, but it's a lot sooner than every 40 years. So we've got to learn, and we've got to be able to rapidly put in perhaps Army procurement objectives worth, not Army acquisition objectives worth, into the fleet. So this one-size-fits-all mentality has its limits, and we must kind of put that aside and look at what we can do to support rearm, to support the initiatives that the Army has to balance readiness and modernization. I'll leave with, we must create an economic dilemma for our enemy. There is no way we can afford to launch munitions that are priced at a premium for our taxpayer as well as the U.S. Army, and survive in that future battlefield against fairly rudimentary capabilities. So, and we've got to create the economic dilemma as well for the enemy, and we're doing that through a lot of our programs. It goes unrecognized, but some of the range initiatives we have are strictly how do we defeat an enemy at range at the lowest cost, and do it effectively. And that's often missed, but wartime many times becomes an issue of logistics and resources that a nation has. And obviously we want to make sure our technology is the best value for both the Army and the U.S. taxpayer. Okay,
thank you. I'm going to ask a question that sort of lumps a bunch of questions I've got from the audience into one big one. So when we're talking, I think the optionally manned fighting vehicle program is a good example of this, or maybe the only example of this, but it seemed to uncover a disconnect between the goals and priorities and sort of ways of functioning of the acquisition community versus Army Futures Command, a brand new command still figuring things out. So the acquisition community, I think at the time, wanted to, pause, maybe give teams a little bit more time to get in their bids. Army Futures Command wanted to stick to a schedule, and rightfully that's important to stay in a schedule. It ensures that you have the funding and the backing to move forward, and that programs stay alive. So what are you doing to apply the lessons learned from that to sort of fix that disconnect? I think, General Todd, your position is probably some of the answer to that, but how are you applying the lessons learned from something like optionally manned fighting vehicle program and needing to restart that in order to work more seamlessly together in the future, to be attached at the hip, as you say?
That's a fair question. And if you look at kind of how we learn to work together as a community, both Army Futures Command integrating Army Modernization Enterprise and ASALT handling the material piece of that. Sometimes we do outrun our headlights. We get a little ahead of ourselves. And if we happen to put a requirement in place that industry can't meet, it's important we listen. And I think that's why we were talking about over-communicate earlier. Be as transparent as we possibly can be. And if anything, it gets rid of this lockstep, okay, at these times of the year we will talk. Now, we've got to talk continuously, so we're continuously sensing where industry is, so that we're not surprised, and don't have industry bid on a particular requirement that we put out there. Now, there's a healthy balance to that, though, because we do want to push concepts and technology, and as Scott pushes me often, towards what are traditionally objectives, and not just to meet the minimum for our soldiers. That's a healthy balance. What I would say is OMFE, we stuck to it. We put an RFP out. We're doing the same thing right now with a draft RFP for FLAR. This is not to say that we won't ever make adjustments to our strategy. I think part of being agile is the ability to make adjustments. But I think what we did is we learned through that process. We hope to not really get out there in front of any of our partners in the future, whether it be industry, whether it be our stakeholders, right, obviously throughout the government, as well as our joint partners and coalition partners as well. So it's definitely a constant learning event, constant maturing of the process and the people engaged in it. You're right. One of the reasons I am here, and Scott and I were brought in basically this year, this last summer, fall, was to create a team that could sew up really some of those seams and gaps. And I think we're doing so. We're committed to OMFE, and we'll see where it takes us. Hopefully we'll continue to get better every day.
Okay, before I jump into a bigger question, I just have a little bit of a housekeeping question on something you said, General McKean, regarding the doctrine. You said that you were planning on, reaching the point where you can start calling this concept doctrine in, I think you said next summer. Do you mean this coming summer in 2021, or do you mean the following summer in 2022?
22 is the target date, the summer of 22.
Okay, thank you for that. I have another question from Sydney Friedberg with Breaking Defense, and it's a big one. How do you prepare for the bow wave of 31+4 programs moving from PowerPoint to prototype to production over the 2020s?
So I mentioned rearm just a minute ago, and we're conducting rock drills right now with G3 of the Army, FORSCOM. We're participating in those. Lieutenant General Jim Richardson went to the most recent one. I know that Bob Marion Lieutenant General Marion from ASALT was there. And it really has to do with not just what we can afford to do, but the absorption rate and how it impacts readiness. Readiness certainly is the key tenet of any of our forces as we prepare them to engage in our nation's conflicts. What we don't want to do is to affect it to a point to where we're not ready. So with that being the driving factor, these rehearsals, if you will, that we're going through right now, attempt to take all those delivery dates, all those first unit equips, all those initial operation capability dates, and synchronize them. I think what you'll see because of rearm rock drills is we want to move, dates of fieldings from here to there as we optimize. Again, we do not want to remain in a sub-optimized position. And whether it was previously the material community and other communities sub-optimizing amongst themselves, the last thing we want to do as AFC, as an ACOM, a new ACOM, Army Command inside the Army, is not to synchronize with the other Army commands. So FORSCOM, Army Material Command, and TRADOC all have roles to play in that, and we're counting on the G3 to lead us through quite a bit of that. But I have no doubt you will see some production rates, and we'll ask probably some vendors to do some storage for us as we find the sweet spot in the year to actually field and modernize a unit.
Okay, well, thank you for that. We are just about out of time. I have so many questions I wasn't able to get to. Seems like a lot of them are based on project convergence, so maybe we'll plan another event and and do something solely focused on that. I think it's obviously a hot topic. But thank you so much for taking the time. I want to thank Dr. Gorey, Lieutenant General McKean, Lieutenant General Todd for joining us. And thanks again to Leonardo DRS for supporting this episode. And then as a reminder, a recording of this webcast will be available at defensenews.com and at the AUSA Global Force Next Media Center. To get alerted about all of our upcoming webcasts and events, please sign up for our events newsletter at defensenews.com/newsletters. And don't forget to register for the C4 ISRNet conference by scrolling to the bottom of this page. Thanks again for joining us.